Thank you, everyone, for coming. Full house. This is terrific. So if it's okay with you, maybe we can save a few minutes for questions.
Sure.
Before we get to the end. So, I don't think there's any better illustration of the importance of what we're talking about than what happened, curiously enough, in the Supreme Court last month, because there was an argument in an age discrimination case filed by a pharmacist who said she'd been denied promotions because of her age. And then Chief Justice Roberts, who's 64 years old, said, and he's got his job for life, by the way, he said, he says, "Is okay boomer ageist?" And I thought, this is the person who can tell us. Okay boomer, that phrase that's emerged, and I still don't know what it means. And I think, what if I'm not an okay boomer? What if I'm only a so-so boomer? I feel very anxious about this. But our guest here today, the author of This Chair Rocks, a manifesto against ageism by Ashton Applewhite. So thank you for being here as well.
My pleasure.
And so what struck me as I read this book was how we all use language every day without even thinking about how ageist it is. So we have okay boomer, but there's so much else that's important in the way we speak to each other, the way we speak to people who are younger, to people who are older. So give us the rundown of the no-go phrases.
Well, it's a minefield out there, obviously. But I would say my biggest bugaboo is think about how you use the words old and young. It's that simple. We tend to think of old as insert negative thing and young. People say, I don't feel old. What we really mean by that, I think, is that we don't feel useless. We don't feel incompetent. We don't feel ugly. Use that word, because I don't know about you, when I was 13, I felt all of those things a lot more than I do now at 67, right? And we use young as a substitute for sexy or with it or, tracking what's happening. So look at how you use those words. And I mean, another really good rule of thumb in life in general is call people what they want to be called. Treat them the way you would like to be. Do you like it when people call you young lady? I don't like it. So, just be thoughtful in that way.
What's paradoxical is even as science and nutrition have extended our lifespan and the quality of our lives, we still retain sort of medieval attitudes or even Neanderthal attitudes from a time when people didn't reach 35, much less 70.
Yeah, I mean, social change is slow. Sociologists call it structural lag. This is an incredibly rapid change. Longer lives are a function of that happened, really in the second half of the 20th century, which is a blink of an eye in evolutionary times, and also socially. And the roles and institutions around us haven't had time to catch up, right? So it's not that it's all, blindness and prejudice, and it really means, as I see it, that we have this amazing opportunity to think thoughtfully about what those longer lives mean and how we want to inhabit them.
And what about other cultures where age is respected and regarded, maybe because it was so rare to get to that age?
Well, people always say, isn't it better somewhere else, looking wistfully eastward, usually?
Or you mean Boston? Oh,
keep going. I mean, there are cultures that have a tradition of ancestor worship, Confucianism. Many indigenous cultures have a tradition of respecting their elders, and we can certainly learn from them, but I think we need to develop our own practices if that's not your culture. Capitalism is not, is a driver of inequality in ageism in particular, and ableism, discrimination against people with disabilities, because it tends to rate the value of a human being according to their conventional economic capacity. And so China is a good example, and urbanization is another driver because it separates the generations. As China, which used to have, certainly a tradition of great respect for its elders, as capitalism and urbanization leave the very young and very old in the countryside, it becomes a less hospitable culture in which to age. So everyone in the world is hostage to these massive, macroeconomic and demographic trends.
If you look at even the Industrial Revolution, where people left extended families living in the countryside to live in nuclear families or no families at all in the city, and does anything in our literature, if you read old journals, if you read novels from 200 years ago versus now, how people look at aging and regard older people?
Well, they lived in smaller communities where we were exposed to people of all ages, right? Multi-generational families were the norm. And it's one of the exciting things to see is intergenerational initiatives popping up all over the place, in the workforce, in housing, that have nothing to do, I think, explicitly with combating ageism, but which implicitly, obviously, if you live in a community of people with all ages, the contribution of people of all ages is apparent. I mean, it's obvious that an intergenerational world in which we are in contact with people of all ages is better. I mean, if you think about it, in the US, age segregation cuts us off from most of humanity. A very small percentage of Americans have a close friend more than 10 years older or younger, and that's not even half a generation. So one of the things I like to urge people to do is think of something you like to do and find a mixed age group to do it with. Because the number one...
Skydiving.
There you go.
Yeah.
Or,
hey, George Bush did it at 90.
Yeah,
so.
well, that's not something. Don't get me started on the skydiving octogenarians. But starting out... Uh-oh, this room is probably full of them. Uh-oh, there I go. Foot in mouth.
They've got the weather for it.
But the most, and I can't tell you how skeptical I was about all of this starting out. I thought surely the most important component of a good old age is how healthy you are. And then, nope. Then I thought, well, obviously wealth then, being able to buy supports. The most important component is a solid social network, which is one arena women are generally at a disadvantage, but women tend to have stronger social networks. And so that's a really good reason, for obvious reasons, to make and cultivate younger friendships. And when younger people are around us and see that we kind of like being the age we are, I think it makes them less afraid, and I think it makes us more generous to the young.
And yet you say, as we've structured an economy that kind of squeezes older people out, we've also structured a sub-economy to reward that segregation. And you look at Leisure World as the pioneer, places where you can't get in unless you're over a certain age.
Yeah, and that makes me think of the fact that ageism also discriminates against younger people. It's any judgment on the basis of age, yeah.
Now, I stepped in it by mentioning George Bush and the skydiving thing. And there really were places in this book where I laughed out loud because it was so funny to see our examples put before us in a fashion we weren't used to. But the super aging as an example and as a reproach to everybody else. Like you look at the Jane Fonda and you go, oh, 70 is the new 20. And I'm going, I wasn't 20 at 20, how's that going to work? So talk about those extremes, because they really, you see it in advertising, you see it in journalism, where you write about the amazing George Bush or the amazing Jane Fonda.
I mean, those people are amazing. I went down and got arrested with Jane Fonda 3 weeks ago, and she's amazing. And they are, really inspiring examples, but they are one end of a spectrum. So that's part of it. At the other end of the spectrum are people who are perhaps confined to a room, confined to a bed. I think it's really important to remember that their lives can be really meaningful also. And I mean, the skydiving octogenarians embody sort of this doctrine of successful aging as it goes by, or sometimes positive aging. And again, more power to them. We each need to do this stuff in our own way, at our own speed, but it's expensive. And the successful aging doctrine really means working really hard to move and look like a younger version of yourself. It really means trying to stop the clock. The clock can't be stopped.
So step away from the Botox.
Do whatever you need to do. Honest to God, no judgment. People do. This is complicated. And getting older is complicated. We each need to make the compromises we make in our own way. So honest to God, no judgment. But remember that you don't have to want to jump out of an airplane, and that there is no one right way to age. The whole phrase successful aging, I mean, we don't fail at childhood. We don't fail at middle age. If you wake up in the morning, you are aging successfully.
What did I tell you, funny?
And it shouldn't be a competition.
And I have to say that for all of those stories that reproach us, the Jane Fondas and the George Bushes, we don't see stories about people who are doing well with limitations,
Well,
that they're
you don't.
contented,
I'm
or
glad you mentioned
this is
that.
my garden and this is my world.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there are only two inevitable bad things about getting older. People you've known all your life are going to die, and some part of your body is going to fall apart. Cognitive decline is not inevitable and not typical of aging. But, that's scary. Those are, that's they're the scary things about getting older, running out of money, ending up alone, getting sick. Those fears are real. And you tend to, and the media, does tend to do the stories about the extremes, the skydivers or the people with early onset Alzheimer's who are, confined to bed. And those are scary stories. None of us want to think about them. Most of us will inhabit, by definition, the messy middle, right? Which is a much harder story to write. You're a journalist. I get that. But that is where most of us will continue to do the things we really love doing, even if perhaps we can't do them in the way we used to, but right to the end. And that is the true, that's the story.
You ran across and saw some of these truths as you got older yourself, just the way your book about divorce was sort of, oh gee, that's the case with divorce. Who knew?
I did. I wrote I don't like writing. I have no process. I only write books when I feel I have to. But I did write my first serious book. I didn't start writing until my early 40s because I decided I couldn't stay married. And I found a lawyer, and he said, more and more of my clients are people like you, meaning women, who realized they couldn't stick it out. And I went home and found out that 2/3 of divorces were initiated by women. It's been that way forever, really accessible fact. I had assumed it was 98% men dumping the sad wife for a fertile trophy version. And I just thought, why don't I know this? Why is our vision of marriage of life after divorce so grim? Is marriage so terrible? Is life afterwards not so bad? And that's how I came to write a book called Cutting Loose, Why Women Who End Their Marriages Do So Well, which is not an anti-man book or an anti-marriage book. It's an anti-patriarchy book. 20 years later, I'm 55, I'm getting nervous about getting older. As skeptical as you can be, I started researching longevity, and in a matter of weeks, literally, and now it's been over 10 years, learned that almost everything I knew about getting older was way off base or flat out wrong. The odds of getting Alzheimer's, odds of ending up in a nursing home. I thought, I don't know, maybe 30%. The percentage of Americans over 65 in nursing homes, not all of senior residents, but nursing homes, is 2.5%. It was 4% when I started out a decade ago, and so on. Again, not that the scary stuff isn't real, but that our fears are so out of proportion. And that's what was the catalyst for this book, is like, why don't we know these things? Because they are readily accessible. I am not digging around for arcane stuff. We don't know those things about marriage because we live in a sexist, ageist, capitalist, patriarchal society. Minus the ageist, slap ageism onto it. That's why we don't know these things about aging.
And so to make that the template of prejudice, you had such a salient line that ageism is prejudice against our future selves. When we buy into this, we're setting ourselves up for failure 10, 20, 50 years from now.
Yeah, I should say that's not a line of my own devising. It is something that anyone who thinks about this realization that they arrive at. All prejudice is based on othering, seeing that group, whatever that other sports team, other nationality, as other than ourselves. The weird thing about ageism is that other is our own future selves, and it gets its little, hooks into us with age denial. Somehow if we eat enough kale, jump out of enough airplanes, whatever it is, it's not going to happen to us, even though, of course, we know that it is. So that's not good for us. I mean, it's self-loathing. It's not healthy to go through life dreading your future in that way.
And you see, as you point out in the book, people who shy away from aging as if it were a communicable disease. It's like, oh my God, I don't want to sit over there next to those old people.
I call it age cooties. I can't tell you how many publishers turned that book down because I actually ended up self-publishing because no one would, and then Macmillan came along and picked it up, but no one would give it the kind of attention I thought it deserved. And I had a partner who knew a lot about publishing, so he helped me do it, which I was lucky for. But people are so scared of this subject, but then it's like once you look into it, I remember during that grim time, and I thought, where I was trying to find my way, and I thought, well, if all you get out of this is that you feel so much better about the years ahead, that may have to be enough, and that's a lot. Although another little voice said, if you can't sell a project about feeling better about getting older to the baby boom, you are really an idiot. But it was a hard road because we have this aversion that is culturally conditioned.
There's a capitalist paradox, though, because you can tell if you watch 60 Minutes versus some sitcom, am I supposed to be watching 60 Minutes when they're advertising incontinent aids and walkers and hearing aids versus the sitcoms? It's like, oh, there's a new iPhone out. The one you bought 30 minutes ago isn't any good anymore. You have to buy this one. And so you see the paradox of marketing because people in the boomer generation have a lot more disposable income than this supposed ideal audience, the 18 to 35.
Especially women. Right? Older women control most of the disposable income. We buy more stuff. We make more purchasing decisions. And yet the prejudice is so strong, they don't even want to try and sell us stuff. Right? Like those marketing charts they go like 18. Someone sent, I have a blog called Yo, Is This Ageist? Which is modeled on this fantastic blog, Yo, Is This Racist? Where you can send stuff in. And one woman, there was some online place where you could order clothes. It wasn't Stitch Fix, but they had it broken down. If you wanted clothes for like 18 to 22-year-olds, 22 to 27, and it stopped at, I think, 30.
Then it's a shroud.
A corset and a shroud. Which is so crazy. And the biological fact is the longer we live, the more different from one another we become. Think about a high school reunion, right? How everyone looks sort of the same-ish, if you know what I mean, when we graduate. And so the older we are, the less our chronological age says about what we're capable of, what we're doing socially, cognitively, physically. So that is another reason that stereotypes on the basis of age. All stereotypes are stupid and wrong, but stereotypes on the basis of age are especially ill-informed, although ageism is no worse or better than any other prejudice.
I have to admit, I had a real sense of schadenfreude, that glee in the misfortune of somebody else when I read that Forever 21 is going into bankruptcy. They had it coming.
That's very mean.
This is a book that I read slowly because there were so many nuggets that I had to stop and think about. And this was one of them that was so moving. Walter Mosley, whom I've interviewed before, said, when you become old, you become black, pushed aside by a society that's moving ahead only with what it believes is good. It's the experience black people have had in America forever. And I thought, what a trenchant observation on his part, that you become invisible.
That's complicated. It makes me think about the fact that ageism is the first form of discrimination that many white men encounter. So I'm hoping some of y'all rally to the cause. But yeah, the whole business of invisibility, which is complicated because we become invisible if we buy into the dogma, which all of us do to some degree, that we are only beautiful and worthwhile if we are young, if we are thin, if we are white. And that's why it's so important to ally with these other causes, because they all, compound and reinforce each other, I think. So. And
that gets into questions of class and ageism and race and ageism,
Big time, yeah. There was just a huge study across 45 countries showing, the intersection between attitudes towards aging and health. Our attitudes affect how our minds and bodies function at the cellular level. My favorite example is that people with, I don't say a more positive attitude towards aging, although that's usually how it's put. People with a fact rather than fear-based attitude towards aging are less likely to get Alzheimer's, even if they have the gene, that predisposes them to the disease. This big study that was just published 2 weeks ago, best, top flight journal, showed that how ageism, structural ageism, and internalized ageism. It was the first study to look at both our own internal attitudes and structural discrimination that older people face in society, showed that it is a significant driver of illness of all different kinds and mortality. Shorter lives, not surprisingly, it correlates to socioeconomic class around the world, so ageism is a significant driver also of global inequality.
There's a line that if you don't know anything else of Dylan Thomas, there's the rage against the dying of the light. So what should there be rage about? Is it about
That's a
ageism?
Really good question.
Is it, where does that anger go?
In the beginning I'm like, rage on, and then I started, there is no right answer, right? Different things make each of us upset and are easy for others of us. I think it's important not to rage at the idea of getting older, because guess what? It's going to happen to all of us. What I've done with that is to rage at the structures that pit us against each other and that profit from our fears. So rage at them.
There's a chapter you have that begins with a Spanish anecdote about the bull looking different when you're in the ring. And how early in our lives we say, oh, I never want to get like that. I don't want to be a vegetable, to use the old word.
And we've all done that,
and,
right?
And
it's human.
We say we don't, but you write about case after case where as people get closer to death, even within capacities, they say, no, I don't think I want to leave just yet.
No, I want every minute, right? I heard that phrase. I went on a journalism trip to Johns Hopkins, and there was a bioethicist named Tom Finucane who said that his mantra was a Mexican saying that the appearance of the bull changes when you enter the ring, which I shortened to the bull looks different, right? It looks different to the matador. We live in a society that places this incredible value on youth, on beauty, on mental acuity, and all of this. And we forget that this prejudice colors our perception, and that when we are living it, psychologists call it the psychologist's fallacy. You can never know what another person is thinking or seeing. As we get in it, right, our perspective changes, of course. And that is actually, and also one of the ideas that I started out with was like, obviously everything about getting old was going to be awful. And one of the awfulest things about it was that death was getting closer. I mean, I had this mental cartoon of the shadow of the Grim Reaper stretching across the sad iron bedstead. The knowledge that time is short does not fill people with dread. It makes us, that awareness makes us spend our time more wisely. And like many things, it's not correlated to age inherently. It's something we also see in younger people with a mortal illness. And the awareness that time is short enables us to live in the moment. And that's why kids are happiest and why the very old are happiest. Which is it's so interesting. It just, honest to God, it gets more interesting all the time.
You also talk about intimacy for older people, and I thought that what would be a very good word, a single word, elder sex. It sounded like a medieval village in England or something. I want to live in elder sex.
I think you're thinking of outer course.
No. That's the suburb.
Wow, outer course and elder sex. This sounds like a dystopian novel. Someone else will have to write it.
But here's yet another taboo or something we're supposed to observe.
Why would we stop, having sex or being intimate or our touch, right? I mean, I say the right to intimacy is lifelong. If you make sex a priority, and it's okay for it not to be, right? For a lot of people, your libido does diminish. For a lot of people, it's nice not to be driven around by that. Or for women to just sort of relax and stop trying to compete in that arena. But if you embrace a broader notion of the form sex can take, right, then you can enjoy really satisfying sex. I mean, and sex is a perfect example. You know, the movies and advertising, you know, valorizes teen sex. Well, I don't know about y'all, but the sex I had when I was very young was not the best sex of my life. Let's just put it that way. So why on earth are we still holding it up as an example?
Immortality science, the idea that you can live for a long time. The biggest
forever.
Forever, excuse me. But some of the biggest subscribers are Silicon Valley billionaires who are 35 years old, who think that because they're Silicon Valley billionaires, they should live forever. And so here's this Tantalus of possibility, but that also skews what it is to be human,
well,
the whole meaning of our lives.
I think so. I mean, obviously, I mean, we know from literature and myth that it is the fact that life is finite that gives it meaning. Now, those Silicon Valley people will not agree with that, and that's a philosophical question. Obviously,
Gigabytes
you could
give
disagree.
It meaning.
But as long as you are chasing eternal youth, you are never in the moment, right? So another problem with immortality science is that it siphons away research money. Because of ageism, we don't know much about the basic biology of aging. Imagine if they could fix arthritis. That's my ailment, you know, or macular degeneration, you know, these conditions that plague millions and millions of people. But it's much more sexy to give it to the fountain of youth than it is to try to cure something like not sexy at all, like Parkinson's. So, and the additional layer I'd put on top of that is, okay, we're all going to live to be 300 or whatever. Who wants to get old in a society that treats us like second-class citizens?
Yeah, you have 30 or 40 years of your life facing that.
Yeah, or, well, Peter Thiel will have hundreds.
Well, we talked a little bit about language, ageism in language, but you also spend time talking about how we need to talk about ourselves when we find ourselves in that cohort dealing with doctors, for example. So let's spin a little bit on that.
Well, we are barraged with negative messages about age and aging from childhood on. Children's books, Disney cartoons. And most of us never step back to think about challenging them. So the very first step, you know, is to look at your own bias, because we are all biased, and we can't challenge bias unless we're aware of it. Now I forgot your question.
Oh, it's about how you deal with medical professionals when it comes to your own.
If you think that if you internalize this idea that you are lesser, that you are, you know, not so important. I mean, with doctors also, we're conditioned to believe that doctors are superior, you know, they do have a position of authority and so on. Or even the idea of being invisible, you know, going to the bar and getting a drink and the bartender doesn't look at you. It's really important to
That's what a $20 bill is for.
Well, I find it what's pounding on the bar is for. I mean, you know, I just like stare them down. I mean, but that's
Better
me.
tactic.
Whatever works, $20, whatever works, or go to a nicer bar. You know, there is no one right way to do this. But it is, you know, this idea. I mean, the ugly heart of ageism is that to age is to lose value as a human being, and I think that's wrong, you know, on every level. And if it's hard to make that case for yourself, which can be harder to advocate for ourselves than for others, and think of the people you know, and young people too, right? The kids who don't, I mean, this is not a family-friendly society. We don't really care about kids. The US, we don't fund education. Think about those people too, because ageism is discrimination against people at both ends of the spectrum who don't vote, right? And children really have no agency, and lots of older people are sidelined too. So reach out for the sort of larger social justice piece of it, I suggest.
So when we talk to medical professionals, how should we present ourselves?
Well, I just put, I would love it if medical charts didn't have the patient's age until page 4, right? You know, where they couldn't judge you they would have to judge you by your physical capacity.
Before they even walk in the room.
Right.
And there you are wearing a paper gown too. It's kind of a drawback.
It's not good. Right. It's not a good look, let's face it.
It's not power dressing.
It's not power dressing, especially in the back, You can put another one, though, on the back, and that covers up the gap. Okay, there's a little trick. You know, I think the first step is to look at your own ageism and realize the ageist thinking that we have all internalized over a lifetime. The good news is once you see it in yourself, which is not pleasant, you're like, holy crap, I'm part of this, then you start to see it everywhere in the world. And that is really liberating. And take that newfound sense of yourself, I would say, into the world, into the doctor's office, into the bar, wherever you go, and say, you know, why, I mean, a classic example, I remember going with my partner and his mom. His dad was in the emergency room. He's in bed. Ruth is here. She's tiny. She's hunched over. And the doctor keeps talking to Bob and not to Ruth, who's sharper than anyone in this room. I got down on my knees so that my face would be at the same level as hers, and he still wouldn't talk to her. And I think you can say, except did I have the chops to do this in the moment? No. You know, why aren't you talking to Ruth? Or could you please, maybe not so, but, you know, could you please speak to the patient's wife? She's right here.
And even in journalism, you do that. You get down on the level of the person you're talking to
And
make
presume
it feel like
capacity.
it's a shared
Presume
experience.
capacity.
Yeah.
Not. And another, speaking of journalism, I would love age to be taken out of newspaper stories. Unless, you know, and people say, oh, no, it's part of the who, what, when, where, why. Well, we used to put race in newspaper stories.
Yeah, we did.
And we don't anymore. And I would submit that it's exactly the same. If people, we wouldn't know how old they were. Well, that confusion is all to the good because it keeps us from falling back into habits of thinking and prejudices that we all have.
So what do people say? What's your suggestion when somebody says, oh, you don't look 80, you know? How things that are meant to be compliments, like we said earlier, somebody saying, oh, young lady, what would you like? The person at the restaurant or at Starbucks.
Yeah. Don't do that to me. I only have one really good snappy answer in over a decade, which is when someone says, you look great for your age, say, you look great for your age too.
Good.
Sunny. And let it just sit there, because that uncomfortable moment is when the person has to think back on, gee, I meant it as a compliment, why doesn't it feel like one? Without, and you don't want to embarrass them. A really good all-purpose rejoinder is like, what do you mean by that? And try to keep the snark out, which is tempting, but really, what?
Oh, go with it once in a while.
Well, I'm not, as you probably guessed, like not the most temperate person. But when we put people on the defensive, it doesn't help. I mean, I remember I was going to an outdoor dance party, and I went into a shop to look for a shirt, and I said I wanted it for that. And she said, with sleeves, of course. And I, super trained professional that I am, was like, what do you mean by that? You know, how do you know I don't have Michelle Obama arms? And it was not a teachable moment for either of us. But, you know, what I should have said was, you know, it's warm out. Why would you think that? You know, or, you know, how come? You know, just question the assumption, because it is ageist and it is offensive.
The French phrase is the spirit of the staircase, which is you think of the right thing to say as you're going down the staircase and leaving after it already happened. So
exactly.
Try to get it a little earlier
than that. What do you mean by that? Or why, you know, is a really good one. I mean, why is tempting? Why would you call me young lady? But that's a little in your face, you know. You know, you look great for 80. That's what 80 looks like. You know, it's really hard. That's an old Gloria Steinem line. You know, this is what 40 looks like. It's really hard not to accept a compliment on those terms, but when we do, you know, you look great for, you know, I would never have thought you were whatever age you are. We can only accept the compliment at the expense of everyone else our age who doesn't look quite so good. Yeah. And we are reinforcing the notion that X-year-olds look a certain way, and we don't. We all look different, and that diversity is fantastic.
So we have time for a few questions. What I will do, I'll point to you and call on you, but I need you to stand up so I can hear you and repeat the question up here. So let's see if we have a question. Oh my God, you're just also impressed in reading your book already. Yes, stand up, please.
What is wrong with just saying simply, thank you?
Okay, so the question is, when you hear something like, you look great for 80, what's wrong with just saying thank you?
Well, as I just said, it reinforces the idea that X-year-olds look a certain way. And I think it's a better compliment to just say, you look fantastic, because then age is stripped out of the equation, which I happen to think is better. But, you know, we got to do this in our own way.
Like it?
So
go
you
for
should
it.
do whatever works for you.
Okay, someone else? Well, I'm sorry. No, well, let me ask you about something you write about, which you call the independence trap. And this is another thing that people build for themselves and set themselves up for.
This whole idea that anyone, in my opinion, no one is independent ever. We're certainly not independent when we're born. We need help of all kinds as we move through life, especially when we have young children, when we break our leg, whatever it happens to be. The U.S., I think, is the worst, the Marlboro man, the independent person who doesn't ask for help. We all need help, lifelong. There should be no shame in asking for it. These are two-way transactions. I've been seeing the cheesy exercise of where you ask people who likes to help people. Every hand goes up, just about. Who likes to receive help? Nobody. Well, think about that. As we get older, we do need more help, often not on our own terms. And I'm not saying those changes are welcome, but they are part of life. There is no binary, but there's no young-old binary. There's no independent-dependent binary. There's no mobile-immobile binary. And this I'd like to take, independent living, all of that. I'd like to take independence out of the whole discourse and talk about how the ways we can support ourselves interdependently from birth to death and take the shame out of asking.
We were talking about stereotypes, but list a few of the myths about aging that your research found not to be true, in spite of the fact that they're very deeply entrenched in our thinking.
Well, I would say the worst one is that old people are alike. I mean, the marketing checklists, most of them do go past 40, but to 65, as though everyone over 65, buys the same things and does the same things. I mean, stereotyping is at the heart of all prejudice. That older people aren't competent, that older people can't master technology. If being able to feed our children depended on us learning nuclear fusion, we'd figure it out, right? It's a question of motivation and access. That old people don't have sex, that everyone's going to lose their marbles.
And the one you talked about, too, is kids versus canes, that old people consume...
Oh, thank you for bringing that one up.
...the economy in a...
I mean, all prejudice operates to pit us against each other. Whether, factory workers, the Polish factory workers and the Italian factory workers, competing instead of organizing for better wages, or stay-at-home moms arguing with moms in the paid workforce about who's a better, mom. Wrong struggle. Join forces, close the gender wage gap, then you can choose whether or not to stay home. When old and young people are squabbling about who has more, it's the wrong struggle. It's a myth that older people take jobs away from younger ones. The amount and nature of labor is not fixed. And if there's only 2 jobs in town, then indeed you might have an 80-year-old and an 18-year-old competing for that sucky barista job. But that's not a too many old people problem, that's a labor market problem.
And what about people staying in the workforce? Because the corollary of that is you are taking jobs away by staying in the workforce.
Higher rates of employment among older people correlate with higher rates. And that's a Pew Research study. I mean, this is all. And my book has plenty of footnotes, not in a scary way, hidden at the back of the book, substantiating all of this. Scarcity thinking is really tempting. It's easier to be afraid than it is to embrace a more complicated, trickier story.
And our brains do work differently. Everybody's worried about losing it, so to speak. But there's more to search out in the older brain. It's like having a bigger file.
Bigger database.
Right, that you have to go through.
That came out of a, don't ask me why I remember University of Tübingen, however you pronounce it, when I remember. I mean, most of us do lose that, or it slows down the capacity to remember the name of the movie you saw with what's-her-name last week. But most of us don't lose much else. Again, that's not welcome. I wish that part. I always had a terrible memory, so I haven't lost as much as a lot of other people. But the point is not that the fear isn't real, not that the loss isn't real, but that our fears are so out of proportion, and that fear itself is bad for us, socially, cognitively, psychologically, in every way.
Were there other questions we can get to? Yes, we'll start here and then we'll go right in the back. So please stand up.
How do you combat ageism in a very youth-revering society?
Right. I mean, that's essentially the book, is how you combat it. The question is what kind of warrior you want to be, I think.
Thank you.
You may use that.
Right, I mean,
No, she's going to take it from here,
no,
believe
no,
me.
you gave a perfect answer. I mean, it may be nothing more, and I don't mean to be diminutive about it, than just thinking about how you use the word old and young, or thinking twice about blaming, an ache or on being old. I mean, like it's the old joke. I stopped blaming my sore knee on being 67 because my other knee doesn't hurt and it's just as old. When we are barraged with blaming everything on oldness, try and stop those ways of thinking, even if all it does is wake you up a little to your own prejudice because the prejudice is bad for you. You want to take that change out in the world, you start a consciousness raising group. There's a free one called Who Me Ageist. Consciousness raising is the tool that catalyzed the women's movement. And do it with women of all ages. Make friends with some younger women. Because that way, I always say, no one actually wants to be any younger, even in a deeply ageist society. If we had more younger friends, they would see why and how we inhabit our age. And I think we would be more generous to younger people because being young is hard. And with all these messages saying, the only thing to be is young, it's easy to lose sight of that and then fall into this those ungrateful young people,
Wait,
blah, blah,
I can't
blah.
tell millennial jokes anymore? Is that?
No, you cannot.
Okay. All right. Well, there's half my repertoire. The man at the back, can you stand up, please?
Or not.
Aha. The difference, whether men and women view aging differently and process it differently based on what we were hearing. And
Watch out. It's a minefield.
right,
Tell
okay,
me I
so
look
we're
great.
back to the
Thank you.
Yes. So, but men and women who are probably brought up to view aging differently internalize it as well.
Right. I mean, I can't speak to how men and women think differently about it. I can only speak to the social and cultural and historic forces that shape that experience. Women experience aging differently because we face the double whammy of ageism and sexism. This pernicious double standard that says that up to a point, then it starts biting men too, that to age is to lose value, that equates youth and beauty. Did anyone see, I hope this is okay to say, Rose Styron?
Yeah.
Hello?
She's a regular
Do
here.
we think age and beauty can coexist? Take one look at that beautiful, brilliant woman, right? The examples are all around us. We need to see them, right? So, but women are discriminated against. We make less money, so we have less pension in old age. We're sicker in old age. We are penalized for time spent caregiving, out of the labor market.
But there's even an elasticity before you get to the Social Security age, because the joke in Hollywood is that there are 3 ages for actresses: Babe, District Attorney, and Driving Miss Daisy. And for women, Driving Miss Daisy starts about 40, and for men it starts about 60.
And there's only 2 roles.
There's only 2 roles, too. So
Yeah.
I think that we internalize it when we even, think of ourselves in that sense.
We do.
So we have time for one more question. Did we have one more question? Yes, stand up, please. The Clint Eastwood movie, The Mule.
I haven't
Right.
seen it.
Wow, the Clint Eastwood movie, The Mule, where he becomes a drug runner, and the song "Don't Let the Old Man In," is that right? And the idea that you would be excluding people from your life because they are old, is that? Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't. The song didn't register with me. Oh, don't allow yourself to think old. I'm so sorry. I must have had it on mute.
I didn't. I haven't seen it. whether you don't want to, however you think about it, we are the age we are, and how we think is a function of how many times we've circled the sun. So I can't imagine not thinking, this idea of distancing ourselves from our old age, from our very oldness, this denial is not, I don't think it's healthy, and I don't think it's good for us, because it is based in denial of the obvious. We are the age we are, and I think it's a lot better off, we're a lot better off if we can acknowledge that and ideally embrace it, rather than spend a lot of energy, racing around trying to pretend that what's happening to us every damn day and has 1,000 blessings in addition to a lot of difficulties.
All right.
Isn't real.
The book is This Chair Rocked, This Room Rocked. Thank you all for coming.